When receiving a humble florist in his office, the millionaire was shocked when the woman delivered a bouquet with a note written by his mother. His mother had been presumed dead 35 years ago. The 42nd floor of the Calloway Tower pierced through Manhattan's skyline like a steel needle, and from behind the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office, Nathaniel Calloway surveyed his empire with the cold satisfaction of a man who had clawed his way from nothing to everything. At 42, Nate possessed the kind of presence that made boardrooms fall silent and competitors reconsider their strategies. His tailored charcoal suit couldn't quite hide the lean muscle earned from years of boxing, a habit he'd picked up in those godforsaken Texas orphanages where weakness meant a black eye and strength meant survival. His dark hair was perfectly styled, but his eyes held something that no amount of money could polish away, the haunted look of a 7-year-old boy who'd watched his world crumble from the middle of the Golden Gate Bridge. "Mr. Calloway, your 3 o'clock is here." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting his thoughts. "Send them up," Nate replied, not bothering to look away from the window. Below, the city pulsed with the kind of energy that fed his ambition. Millions of people fighting for their piece of the American dream while he sat above them all, untouchable. But that was before the flowers. The elevator's soft ding announced another visitor, another deal, another step toward the kind of power that could protect against the unpredictable cruelties of life. Nate turned from the window, expecting to see another suited executive or nervous entrepreneur. Instead, he found himself staring at a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a different world entirely. She was maybe 34, with auburn hair that caught the afternoon light streaming through his windows. Her hands, he noticed immediately, were calloused, the kind of honest wear that came from real work, not the manicured softness he was used to seeing in his corporate circles. She wore a simple green dress that probably cost less than his tie, and she clutched a bouquet of white carnations against her chest, like they were made of gold. But it wasn't her appearance that stopped Nate cold. It was the flowers, white carnations, his mother's obsession. The flowers she'd grown in their tiny Oakland garden with the devotion of a woman possessed, tending to them even when the bills piled up and his father worked double shifts at the docks. The flowers she'd been clutching in that faded photograph, the last picture ever taken of Evelyn Grace Calloway before she jumped from the Golden Gate Bridge. "Mr. Calloway." The woman's voice was soft, uncertain, with just a hint of a northwestern accent that reminded him of rain and pine forests. "I'm Claire Whitmore." Nate's training kicked in. 35 years of building walls, of never letting anyone see him rattled. "Ms. Whitmore, I wasn't expecting a florist today." His voice came out steady, professional, but inside, something was unraveling. Claire took a hesitant step forward, her green eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I own a small flower shop in Portland, but that's not why I'm here." She held out the carnations, and Nate noticed her hands were trembling. "A woman came to see me 3 years ago. She said she'd been waiting decades for the right moment, and that I should bring these to you today. She seemed to know you very well, and me too." The words hit Nate like a physical blow. No one knew about his mother's carnations. He'd never told a soul about the hours he'd spent as a child, helping her water them, listening to her hum old songs while she pruned the stems. It was his most private memory, buried so deep that sometimes he wondered if he'd imagined it all. Who was this woman? The question came out sharper than he intended. Claire flinched slightly but held his gaze. "She never told me her name, but she had your eyes, Mr. Calloway, and she knew things about me that, well, things that no stranger should know." Nate's world tilted. His mother was dead, had been dead for 35 years. He'd been there that foggy morning, holding her hand as she stood at the bridge's edge, her last words echoing in his 7-year-old mind. "Take care of yourself, baby. Mama loves you more than all the stars." "That's impossible," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he was remembering other details. The way Claire held her head when she was uncertain, a slight tilt to the left that was achingly familiar, the shape of her hands, long-fingered and elegant despite their calluses, the way she looked at him, like she was seeing a ghost. Claire reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with wax that had cracked from decades of waiting. "She told me to give you this when I brought the flowers. She said you'd understand." Nate stared at the envelope as if it were a live bomb. His name was written across it in handwriting he recognized, the same careful script that had signed his elementary school permission slips and birthday cards, the same writing that had been on the suicide note the police found in his mother's purse that terrible morning. But Evelyn Grace Calloway had been dead for 35 years, with hands that had signed billion-dollar deals without trembling. Nate reached for the envelope. The paper felt fragile, like it might crumble at his touch. The wax seal bore the impression of a small carnation, his mother's signature on the letters she'd written to his father during their courtship. "Mr. Calloway," Claire's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Nate looked up at her. This stranger who'd walked into his fortress of steel and glass carrying impossible flowers and a letter from the dead, for the first time in decades. Nathaniel Calloway, the man who'd built an empire on the ashes of his shattered childhood, felt like that terrified 7-year-old standing on a bridge, watching his world fall apart. "No," he said quietly, his fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. "I don't think I am." Outside his windows, Manhattan continued its relentless pace. But inside the corner office of the Calloway Tower, time had stopped. The envelope in Nate's hands felt heavier than any contract he'd ever signed, and the woman standing before him with her honest hands and familiar eyes looked like she might hold the key to 35 years of carefully buried truth. The carnations perfumed the air with their sweet, innocent scent, the same smell that had filled his childhood home before tragedy taught him that love was just another word for loss. The silence in Nathaniel's office stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 42 floors below. Claire watched as this powerful man, a titan of industry who probably crushed competitors before breakfast, stared at the yellowed envelope like it might bite him. Should I leave you alone with that?" she asked softly, shifting the carnations in her arms. The flowers seemed almost alive in the afternoon light, their white petals catching the sun like tiny beacons. Nate's laugh came out bitter and raw. 35 years I've been alone with this." He held up the envelope, then looked at her with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Tell me something." Claire Whitmore from Portland. What did this woman look like? Claire closed her eyes, remembering about 65, maybe 70, silver hair that she wore in this elegant twist. She had these hands. Claire looked down at her own calloused fingers, gentle hands, like someone who'd spent her life caring for things. And she smelled like carnations, Nate finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, how did you—" But Nate was already breaking the wax seal, his movements careful and deliberate. The paper inside was cream-colored stationery, the kind his mother had always saved for special occasions. As he unfolded it, Claire caught a glimpse of that same careful handwriting from the envelope. "My dearest Nate," he read aloud, his voice growing stronger with each word. "If you're reading this, it means Claire has kept our promise. I know this will come as a shock, but I need you to listen with your heart, not your mind." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "Our promise, but I don't understand. She was a stranger who came into my shop 3 years ago. I didn't die that morning on the bridge," Nate continued reading, his knuckles white where he gripped the paper. "I staged my death to protect you and your sister from Victor Langford, the man who murdered your father. He believed that by controlling you 2 children, he could inherit everything Emilio had built." The words hit the room like a physical force. Claire's legs gave out, and she sank into one of the leather chairs facing Nate's desk, the carnations spilling across her lap. "Sister," the word came out as a croak. "That's impossible. I'm an only child. I was adopted as a baby from—" "I separated you both the night I faked my death," Nate read on, his voice now mechanical, as if emotion might destroy him entirely. "Claire was placed with a loving family in Oregon, while you were taken to Texas. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but Victor would have killed you both if he'd found you together." Claire's world tilted sideways. The flower shop in Portland, her adoptive parents, her quiet life arranging bouquets and tending to other people's special moments. All of it suddenly felt like a story someone else had lived. "This is insane," she whispered. But even as she said it, fragments were falling into place. The dreams she'd had since childhood, always the same little boy with dark hair, reaching for her across a chasm she could never cross. The way she'd felt drawn to white carnations without knowing why. The inexplicable sadness that hit her every year around the same date, which, she now realized with growing horror, must have been the anniversary of that morning on the Golden Gate Bridge. Nate set the letter down on his desk with trembling hands. There's more. He looked at Claire with something that might have been wonder or terror. She says she's been watching us both from a distance, working in flower shops, moving every few years to stay hidden. She knew about my company, about the choices I've made, she says. His voice caught. She says I've been unconsciously rebuilding our father's empire, following the same instincts, making the same decisions he would have made. This woman, this Evelyn, Claire said slowly. She's really your mother, our mother. The word our hung in the air between them, foreign and frightening, and somehow exactly right. Nate stood abruptly, pacing to the window. My mother jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge on October 15, 1989. I was there. I saw her fall. He pressed his palms against the glass, his reflection ghost-like in the afternoon light. Except now she's telling me I didn't see what I thought I saw. Claire studied his profile. The strong jaw, the way he held his shoulders when he was thinking. It was like looking in a funhouse mirror, seeing familiar features rearranged on someone else's face. Mr. Calloway. Nate, this is going to sound crazy, but... She took a shaky breath. Do you have any scars? Like, from when you were really little? He turned to look at her, eyebrows raised. Everyone has scars. On your left wrist, shaped kind of like a crescent moon. The color drained from Nate's face. Without a word, he rolled up his sleeve and held out his arm. There, pale against his tan skin, was a thin scar in the exact shape Claire had described. Jesus Christ, he breathed. Claire pushed up her own sleeve, revealing an identical mark. I've had this since I was a baby. My adoptive parents said it was from some kind of accident before they got me, but they never knew the details. For a long moment, they just stared at each other's matching scars, proof of a shared past. Neither of them remembered, but both had carried in their skin their entire lives. There's something else, Nate said quietly, returning to the letter. Victor Langford is still alive, still dangerous. He spent 35 years believing you were both dead, but if he discovers the truth, he'll stop at nothing to finish what he started. The two of you together are the key to everything your father left behind, but you're also the greatest threat to the empire Victor has built on Emilio's blood. Claire felt ice forming in her veins. So this man, this Victor, he killed our father and drove our mother into hiding. According to this, yes, and there's more. Nate's eyes scanned the rest of the letter. She says our father left something for us, something that can only be accessed by both of us together, something Victor has been searching for all these years. The implications crashed over them like a wave. They weren't just long-lost siblings finding each other. They were inheritors of a legacy built on murder and betrayal. And somewhere out there was a man who would kill them both to keep his secrets buried. Claire looked down at the carnations scattered across her lap, their innocent white petals now seeming ominous. What do we do now? Nate folded the letter carefully, his expression hardening into something that reminded Claire of carved stone. Now we find out if our mother is really alive. And if she is, we find her before Victor Langford finds us. 3 hours later, Nate's private conference room had been transformed into a war room. Papers covered the mahogany table. Laptops hummed with activity, and the remains of Chinese takeout containers suggested that neither sibling had much appetite for the revelations unfolding before them. Claire sat across from Nate, her birth certificate spread out like evidence in a trial. The official seal of Oregon looked authentic enough, but the dates had been altered. She could see where someone had carefully changed the year, transforming her from a 7-year-old who'd lost her family into a newborn ready for adoption. This is professional work, Nate said, examining the document through a magnifying glass. Not some back-alley forgery. Someone with serious connections made sure you disappeared completely from the system. My whole life has been a lie. Claire's voice was hollow. She'd called in sick to the flower shop, telling her assistant she had a family emergency. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd never had a family emergency before because she'd never had a family. Nate's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression tightened. My investigator found something. Marcus is the best private detective money can buy. If there's a trail, he'll find it. Marcus Chen arrived 20 minutes later, a compact man in his 50s with the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen everything twice. He set a thick folder on the table and looked between Nate and Claire with professional curiosity. "This is one hell of a case, boss," Marcus said, pulling out a chair. "You're Claire Whitmore here. She officially didn't exist until she was placed with the Morrison family in Portland. Before that, complete void. No medical records, no birth records that match what we're seeing now." Claire felt sick. "What about Nathaniel? His records?" "That's where it gets interesting." Marcus opened the folder and spread out a timeline. Young Nathaniel here was processed through the Texas child welfare system as an orphan, both parents listed as deceased. But there's a gap, 3 days between when his mother allegedly died and when he entered the system. 3 days where a 7-year-old boy was completely off the grid. Nate studied the timeline. "I remember those days. Sort of. I was in a hotel room with a woman who said she was from social services. She kept telling me my mother was gone, that I needed to be brave. I thought I was going crazy because I kept asking for Claire, but everyone said I was an only child." "You remembered me." Claire's voice cracked. "Fragments. Dreams. Mostly. A little girl with red hair who used to make me laugh. I thought I'd made you up." Nate's hand moved unconsciously to his left wrist, tracing the crescent scar. "Tell me about your dreams, Claire." She closed her eyes, remembering. "Always the same one. I'm reaching for a boy across this huge gap, like a canyon or something. He's calling my name, but I can never reach him. I wake up crying every time." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "The boy in my dreams has your face." Marcus cleared his throat. "There's more. I ran deep background checks on Victor Langford on paper. He's clean, successful businessman, philanthropist, even got a humanitarian award 5 years ago. But if you dig deeper," he pulled out another set of documents. 3 business partners over the years died in suspicious circumstances, all ruled accidental. But the pattern's there if you know what to look for. "What kind of pattern?" Nate leaned forward. "Car accidents that weren't quite accidents. A heart attack in a healthy 40-year-old. A drowning that happened to someone who was an Olympic-level swimmer." Marcus's expression was grim. "This guy's a professional, and he's been at it for decades." Claire felt the walls of the conference room closing in. "So our father was just another victim. Emilio Calloway was different," Marcus continued. "Langford didn't just kill him. He systematically destroyed everything Emilio had built, then rebuilt it under his own name. He stole an entire empire." Nate stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, Manhattan pulsed with its usual energy, oblivious to the drama playing out 42 floors above. "Which means everything I've built. Every decision I've made. You've been unconsciously following your father's blueprint," Marcus confirmed. "I compared your business strategies with what I could find about Emilio's operations. It's uncanny. You've made nearly identical choices in similar situations." "How is that possible?" Claire asked. "Nate was 7 when his father died. Genetic memory isn't science fiction," Marcus said. "Instincts, patterns of thinking, even preferences can be inherited. You've both been carrying pieces of your parents without knowing it." Claire thought about her inexplicable love for carnations, the way she'd always gravitated toward nurturing, growing things. Our mother's gardening obsession. Exactly, and there's something else. Marcus pulled out a photograph, grainy, obviously taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. This was taken 6 months ago at a farmer's market in Boston. Claire's breath caught. The woman in the photo was older, her hair silver instead of the chestnut brown Claire remembered from her dreams, but the posture was unmistakable. She was arranging flowers at a small booth, her hands moving with the same gentle precision that Claire recognized in her own work. "That's her," Claire whispered. "That's the woman who came to my shop." Nate studied the photo intensely. "She looks..." He paused, struggling with emotion. "She looks like my mother, older, but it's her. Evelyn Grace is alive," Marcus confirmed. "Living under the name Ellen Gardner, working at various flower shops and farmers markets throughout New England. She moves every few months, never stays in one place long enough to establish a real pattern." "So what now?" Claire asked. "Do we just show up and say, 'Hi, Mom, we got your letter'?" "It's not that simple," Marcus warned. "If I can track her, so can others. And according to your letter, Victor Langford has been looking for any sign that you two survived. If he realizes Evelyn's alive." Nate's phone rang, the sharp sound cutting through the tension. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "I don't recognize this number." "Don't answer it," Marcus said quickly, but Nate had already picked up. "Nathaniel Calloway." The voice on the other end was cultured, with just a hint of an accent that suggested old money and older secrets. "Mr. Calloway, I believe you have something that belongs to me." Nate's blood went cold. He locked eyes with Claire and Marcus, then put the call on speaker. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "Someone who's been waiting a very long time for this conversation. You see, I know about your little reunion today. Touching, really. Brother and sister. Separated by tragedy. Finally finding each other again." The voice carried a smile that somehow managed to sound menacing. "But you're both very naive if you think the past can stay buried forever." Claire grabbed Nate's arm, her face pale with terror. "What do you want?" Nate's voice was steady, but his free hand was clenched into a fist. "What I've always wanted. What your father stole from me. What your mother thought she could keep from me by faking her death and scattering her children like seeds in the wind." The voice hardened. "You have 48 hours to deliver what belongs to me, or I'll finish what I started 35 years ago." The line went dead. In the silence that followed, Claire realized she was holding her breath. The photo of their mother lay on the table between them, and suddenly the woman's cautious posture made perfect sense. She'd been running and hiding for 35 years, and now her children had just painted targets on their backs. "Victor Langford," Marcus said grimly. "He knows." The Calloway Tower security center occupied an entire floor, filled with monitors, servers, and enough surveillance equipment to rival a government facility. At 3 a.m, it was eerily quiet except for the hum of electronics and the soft clicking of keyboards as Marcus's team worked through the night. Nate hadn't slept. Neither had Claire. They sat in the security center's conference room, surrounded by coffee cups and the growing evidence of a conspiracy that had shaped their entire lives without their knowledge. "Jesus," breathed Tommy Rodriguez, Marcus's tech specialist, as data streamed across his multiple monitors. "Boss, you need to see this." Marcus looked up from the financial records he'd been analyzing. "What have you got?" "I've been digging through the Calloway Corporation's personnel files for the past 35 years, cross-referencing with known associates of Victor Langford." Tommy's fingers flew across his keyboard. "Look at this pattern." On the main screen, a web of connections appeared. Employees who'd been hired at key moments, consultants brought in just before major deals fell through, board members who'd pushed for decisions that, in hindsight, seemed designed to sabotage rather than strengthen the company. Claire studied the display with growing horror. "How many people?" "At least 15 over the years," Tommy replied. "Maybe more. They were good. Never stayed long enough to raise suspicions. Always had legitimate reasons for leaving. But the timing," he highlighted several entries. "Every time Nathaniel got close to a major breakthrough that might have led him back to his father's true legacy, something went wrong." Nate felt sick. "The Malaysian shipping deal that collapsed 3 years ago. My security chief said it was industrial espionage, but we never found the leak. Rebecca Hayes," Marcus read from the screen, "joined your team 6 months before the deal. Left right after it fell through. Turns out she was Victor's niece. And the pharmaceutical merger last year." Nate's voice was getting harder. "Stephen Walsh, your lead negotiator. Guess who recommended him?" Marcus pulled up another connection. "A consulting firm that Victor's been secretly funding for decades." Claire watched her brother's face transform as the scope of the betrayal became clear. This wasn't just about their father's murder. This was about 35 years of systematic sabotage, of Victor Langford slowly strangling the empire that Nate had unconsciously tried to rebuild. "Show me the Emilio connection," Nate said quietly. Tommy pulled up another screen, this one showing parallel timelines. "This is what really blew my mind. Look at your father's business decisions between 1985 and 1989, then compare them to yours over the past 15 years. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The same instinct for emerging markets, the same preference for partnerships over acquisitions, even the same choice of office locations. In city after city, Nate had established operations within blocks of where his father had once set up shop. "It's like you've been following a ghost," Marcus said softly. Claire leaned forward, studying the timelines. "What was our father building?" What was so important that Victor killed for it? That's where it gets interesting. Marcus pulled up a new set of documents. Emilio wasn't just running a shipping company. He was creating something bigger, a network of businesses that would revolutionize how goods moved around the Pacific Rim, import-export. Yes, but also logistics, technology, even early internet commerce ideas that were decades ahead of their time. And Victor stole all of it, Nate asked. Not just stole, perverted it. Where Emilio wanted to create jobs and build communities, Victor focused on exploitation and profit extraction, the empire you've been unconsciously rebuilding. It's the good version of what Victor turned into something ugly. A new voice cut through their conversation. Mr. Calloway, Diane, the night security supervisor, appeared in the doorway. There's a situation downstairs. Someone's asking for you specifically. Nate checked his watch. At 3:30 in the morning. She says her name is Ellen Gardner. She looks... Diane paused, glancing at Claire with sudden understanding. She looks like family, sir. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt endless. Claire gripped Nate's arm, her heart hammering against her ribs. 35 years of separation. Of believing their mother was dead, and now she was here, in the marble lobby of the building Nate had constructed as his fortress against the world. Evelyn Grace Calloway, Ellen Gardner, sat on one of the lobby's leather benches, looking impossibly small in the vast space. She wore a simple gray coat and carried a canvas bag that probably contained everything she owned when she looked up and saw them approaching. Her face crumpled. "My babies," she whispered, standing on unsteady legs. "Look how beautiful you both turned out." Claire reached her first, and suddenly she was 7 years old again, breathing in the scent of carnations and safety that she'd forgotten she remembered. Evelyn's arms came around her, and for a moment, the marble lobby disappeared. There was only warmth and the feeling of pieces clicking into place. Nate stood frozen, watching his sister cry in their mother's arms. 35 years of carefully constructed walls, of believing that love was just another word for loss. And here was proof that sometimes the dead came back to life. "Nate," Evelyn's voice broke as she looked at him over Claire's shoulder. "My sweet boy, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." When Nate finally stepped into his mother's embrace, he felt something inside his chest crack open. Not breaking, but expanding. The scent of her hair, the familiar strength of her arms, the way she murmured his name like a prayer. It was all exactly as he remembered, and nothing like he'd imagined it could be again. "We have to get you somewhere safe," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Victor called tonight. He knows we found each other." Evelyn pulled back, her eyes sharp despite the tears. "How much time do we have?" "He gave us 48 hours to give him what he wants," Claire said. "But we don't even know what that is." "I do." Evelyn's voice was steady now, the frightened woman replaced by someone who'd survived 35 years in hiding. "Your father left something for you both, something Victor's been searching for all this time." She looked between her children. "The key to everything he built, and everything Victor destroyed." "What kind of key?" Nate asked. Evelyn smiled, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the woman from his childhood memories. "The literal kind, hidden where only the two of you together can find it." Her expression darkened. "But first, you need to understand what you're really up against. Victor didn't just kill your father, and he didn't just steal his business." She paused, looking around the empty lobby as if Victor might materialize from the shadows. "He destroyed dozens of families. Hundreds of people lost everything because of his greed. Your father's legacy isn't just about money or revenge. It's about justice for everyone Victor has hurt over the past 35 years. Claire felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. "No pressure or anything. Despite everything," Evelyn laughed. "You sound just like your father. He always joked when things got serious, too." Her expression sobered. "We don't have much time. Victor's people are probably already looking for me. But there's something I need to show you both before we can retrieve what your father left behind." "What?" Nate asked. "Proof that everything I've told you is true, and proof that Victor Langford isn't finished killing people to keep his secrets buried." The safe house was a penthouse apartment in Soho that Nate kept for emergencies. Completely off the books. Registered under a shell company that even Marcus had trouble tracking. As dawn broke over Manhattan, casting long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Evelyn spread 35 years of carefully collected evidence across the dining table. "This is Victor Langford," she said, placing a photograph in the center of the table. The man in the picture looked distinguished, grandfatherly even, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He was cutting a ribbon at what appeared to be a hospital dedication ceremony. Claire studied the photo with disbelief. "This is the monster who killed our father. He looks like somebody's sweet grandfather. That's what makes him so dangerous," Evelyn replied grimly. She laid out more photos. Victor at charity galas, shaking hands with politicians, receiving humanitarian awards. Victor's spent 35 years building a reputation as one of America's most generous philanthropists. The Victor Langford Foundation has donated millions to children's hospitals, disaster relief, educational programs. "Blood money," Nate said quietly. Understanding immediately, he's been laundering his guilt, or covering his tracks. Evelyn pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. "Every major donation corresponds to someone getting too close to the truth about your father's death. A journalist investigating shipping irregularities suddenly gets a grant to study environmental issues in South America. A police detective asking uncomfortable questions about that car accident finds himself transferred to a cushy position overseeing Victor's private security initiatives." Marcus leaned over the evidence, his detective instincts engaged. Classic pattern. Make problems disappear by making the people who notice them too comfortable to keep looking. "But not everyone could be bought," Evelyn continued. She placed 3 death certificates on the table. Rebecca Martinez, investigative journalist David Chen, forensic accountant Patricia Williams, federal prosecutor, all died in the past 10 years. All had been asking questions about Victor's business practices. Claire felt her stomach turn. More murders, made to look like accidents, just like your father's death. Evelyn's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly as she arranged the documents. Rebecca's car went off a mountain road during a snowstorm. David had a heart attack while jogging, except he was 28 and in perfect health. Patricia drowned in her own swimming pool. "Jesus," Nate breathed. "How many people has he killed?" "That I can prove, 12, including your father. But I suspect there are more." Evelyn pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her careful handwriting. "I've spent 35 years documenting everything. Following his movements, tracking the connections, he's built his empire on a foundation of corpses." Marcus picked up one of the death certificates. "Why didn't you take this to the authorities?" Evelyn's laugh was bitter. "Because half the authorities are on his payroll. The other half think I'm a dead woman with an unhealthy obsession." She gestured to a stack of official documents. "I legally died in 1989. Ellen Gardner exists only in forged papers and cash transactions. I have no credibility, no legal standing. Nothing but the word of a ghost. But we do," Claire said suddenly, understanding flooding her face. "Nate and I are his legal heirs. We have standing to demand investigations, to push for justice." "Exactly. Which is why he's so desperate to silence you both before you figure out what your father really left behind." Evelyn moved to another section of the table, where she'd laid out blueprints and architectural drawings. "Victor thinks he's been searching for money or property deeds. He has no idea what Emilio actually created." Nate studied the blueprints. They showed a complex network of warehouses, offices, and shipping facilities across the Pacific Rim. But there were notations he didn't understand. Encrypted references to something called Project Phoenix. "What am I looking at?" he asked. "Your father's real legacy." Evelyn's voice carried a note of pride. Emilio wasn't just building a shipping empire. He was creating a network to help people. Refugees, immigrants, families fleeing poverty and persecution. He called it the New Silk Road, but his private name for it was Project Phoenix. "Like rising from the ashes," Claire said softly. "Exactly. He wanted to prove that business could be a force for good, that profit and compassion weren't mutually exclusive." Evelyn pulled out a map covered in red lines connecting cities across Asia, Australia, and the Americas. These routes weren't just for cargo. They were escape routes for people who needed hope. Marcus whistled low. "That's why Victor killed him. He wasn't just stealing a business. He was preventing a humanitarian revolution. And when Victor took over, he perverted everything Emilio had built. Those same routes now smuggled drugs, weapons, and worse. The warehouses that were meant to shelter refugees became distribution centers for human trafficking. Evelyn's eyes blazed with fury. Victor turned your father's dream into his own nightmare. Nate felt something cold and hard settling in his chest. All those business decisions I made, following Dad's instincts. You were trying to rebuild Project Phoenix without knowing it, Evelyn confirmed. Every expansion into Southeast Asia, every partnership with humanitarian organizations, every time you chose to help local communities instead of just extracting profit, you were unconsciously following Emilio's blueprint, which is why Victor's people kept sabotaging me, Nate realized. I was getting too close to recreating what he'd destroyed. Claire looked up from the documents she'd been studying. Mom, where is this key Dad left for us? What exactly are we supposed to find? Evelyn smiled for the first time since they'd been reunited. That's the beautiful part. Your father was too smart to hide something Victor could steal or destroy. The key isn't an object. It's you two, together. I don't understand, Nate said. The real Project Phoenix files are in a vault that requires biometric identification from both of Emilio's children. Your father had genetic scanners installed that read DNA markers specific to his bloodline. Victor could torture or kill 1,000 people, but he can't fake genetics. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Brilliant. The man literally made his kids the key to his life's work. But that's not all, Evelyn continued. The vault also contains evidence of every crime Victor has committed for the past 40 years. Financial records, recorded conversations, even video footage of him ordering murders. Your father was building a case against Victor even before he died. Enough to put him away forever, Claire asked. Enough to destroy him completely, but only if we can get to it before Victor gets to us. Evelyn checked her watch. We have maybe 36 hours before his deadline expires. Nate's phone buzzed with a text message. His blood went cold as he read it. Still playing detective. Check the news. Consider this a preview of what happens to people who disappoint me. V. He quickly switched on the television, surfing to a news channel. The breaking news banner made his stomach drop. Prominent defense attorney found dead in apparent suicide. The reporter's voice filled the room. James Morrison, known for his work with immigrant families and refugee advocacy, was found dead in his Portland home early this morning. Police say he left a note citing depression over recent financial difficulties. Claire screamed. The man on the screen was her adoptive father, the man who'd raised her, loved her, given her everything she needed to become the woman she was today. And Victor Langford had murdered him to send them a message. He's escalating, Marcus said grimly. This isn't about business anymore. It's personal. Through her tears, Claire looked at the evidence spread across the table. 35 years of patient documentation, of lives destroyed and justice delayed. Then let's make it personal right back. The Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston hummed with the quiet efficiency of a world-class medical facility. But in room 714, time seemed suspended. Evelyn Grace Calloway, the woman who'd been dead for 35 years, lay propped against white pillows, an IV line snaking from her arm as afternoon sunlight filtered through Venetian blinds. She looked impossibly fragile, nothing like the warrior who'd spent decades documenting Victor's crimes. Cancer, she'd finally admitted during the drive from New York, had been eating away at her for months. She'd hidden the symptoms, the treatments, the growing weakness, because she'd known that once her children found her, she wouldn't have much time left to help them. I should have told you sooner, she said quietly, watching Claire arrange fresh carnations in a water pitcher. Her daughter had insisted on stopping at the hospital gift shop, unable to bear the sterile emptiness of the room. About the cancer, about everything. But I was afraid that if I reached out too early, Victor would find me before you were ready. Nate sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, his billion-dollar empire feeling meaningless in the face of his mother's mortality. How long do you have? Weeks, maybe days. The doctor stopped being optimistic about timelines. Evelyn's smile was peaceful, resigned. But I've had 35 years to prepare for this conversation. And now that you're both here, I'm not afraid anymore. Claire's hands stilled on the flowers. There has to be something we can do. Experimental treatments. Clinical trials. Sweetheart. Evelyn's voice carried the gentle authority of a mother who'd made peace with her fate. I've fought this as long as I could. But my job now isn't to live forever. It's to make sure you both have what you need to finish what your father started." She reached into her bedside table and pulled out a small metal object. A key, but unlike any key they'd ever seen, it was made of some kind of dark metal that seemed to absorb light, with intricate engravings that looked almost organic, like flowing water or wind patterns. "This is the physical component," she said, placing it in Nate's palm. "But it's useless without both of you present. Your father designed the system so that you'd have to work together." "Where's the vault?" Claire asked, settling into the chair on the other side of the bed. "San Francisco, in the basement of the original Calloway building, the one your father bought when he first started the company." Evelyn's eyes took on a distant look. "It's been abandoned for 20 years. Supposedly condemned, but Emilio had it built to last centuries, not decades." Nate studied the strange key. "Victor doesn't know about this. He knows something's hidden, but he's been looking in all the wrong places. Bank vaults, safety deposit boxes, offshore accounts. He never imagined that Emilio would hide his life's work in plain sight." Evelyn coughed, a harsh sound that made both her children wince. "But now that he knows you're alive and working together, he'll figure it out," Claire finished. "How much of a head start do we have?" "Maybe none." Evelyn's expression grew worried. "I've been careful for 35 years, but desperate times make people careless. If Victor's people have been watching the hospital." As if summoned by her words, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "We need to move now." "What's wrong?" Nate stood immediately. 3 black SUVs just pulled into the hospital parking garage. Professional drivers, tinted windows, and license plates that trace back to shell companies. Marcus was already helping Evelyn sit up. "They're not here for the gift shop." Claire felt ice flood her veins. "How did they find us?" "Doesn't matter now," Marcus said, grabbing the IV pole. "Mrs. Calloway, can you walk?" "I'll crawl if I have to," Evelyn replied with surprising steel in her voice. "But we're not leaving without the secondary files." "What secondary files?" Nate asked. But his mother was already pointing to a loose ceiling tile above her bed. "Your father was paranoid about redundancy. The vault in San Francisco has the main evidence, but he made copies of the most crucial documents." She looked at Claire. "Honey, you're the smallest. Can you reach up there?" Claire climbed onto the bed and pushed up the ceiling tile, her fingers finding a waterproof packet taped to the metal framework above. "Got it. Those documents prove that Victor has been systematically murdering anyone who gets close to the truth about Project Phoenix," Evelyn explained, as Marcus disconnected her IV, "including the real reason he wanted your father dead." "Which was?" Nate asked, helping his mother to her feet. "Victor wasn't just Emilio's business partner." Evelyn's voice was steady despite her obvious pain. "He was my brother." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Claire nearly dropped the packet of documents. "Your brother," Nate's voice cracked. "Our uncle killed our father. Half-brother, technically, same mother, different fathers. Victor was older, always jealous of anything that didn't belong to him." Evelyn leaned heavily on Marcus as they moved toward the door. "When I chose your father over him, when I built a life that didn't revolve around Victor's ego, he couldn't forgive it." Marcus checked the hallway. "Clear for now, but we need to use the service elevator." As they made their way through the hospital's back corridors, Evelyn continued her devastating revelation. Victor didn't just want Emilio's business. He wanted me, had been obsessed with me since we were teenagers, when I married your father and had children with him. It was the ultimate rejection. So he destroyed our entire family because you wouldn't love him back. Claire's voice was filled with horror and rage. "Men like Victor don't understand the difference between love and possession," Evelyn said. "In his mind, I belonged to him by right of blood, and your father stole what was his." They reached the service elevator just as alarms began echoing through the hospital corridors. Not medical alarms, security alerts. "They're inside," Marcus said grimly, jamming the elevator button. "Probably told hospital security they're federal agents looking for dangerous fugitives." The elevator doors opened, revealing 2 men in dark suits. Marcus reacted instantly, his combat training taking over. A brief, brutal fight ensued in the confined space, ending with both men unconscious on the elevator floor. "Jesus," Claire breathed. "Language, sweetheart," Evelyn said automatically. then laughed at the absurdity of worrying about profanity while fleeing from assassins. They rode the elevator to the parking garage in tense silence. Marcus had called ahead, and a nondescript van waited in the designated spot, engine running. "Where to?" Marcus asked as they pulled out of the garage. "San Francisco," Evelyn said without hesitation. "If Victor's people found us here, he'll be moving fast to secure the vault. This might be our only chance." "Mom, you're in no condition to travel across the country," Claire protested. "I'm in no condition to do a lot of things," Evelyn replied calmly. "But I'm not dying in a hospital bed while Victor Langford wins. Your father and I started this fight 35 years ago, and I'm going to see it finished." Nate's phone buzzed with another text from Victor. "The hospital was just a warm-up next time. I won't leave survivors. Last chance to be reasonable." Through the van's rear window, they could see smoke rising from the hospital's parking garage. Victor had sent a message that was impossible to ignore. He would burn down the world to get what he wanted. "How long to San Francisco?" Evelyn asked. 6 hours by plane," Marcus replied. "If we can get to the airport without being intercepted." "Then we better hurry," Evelyn said, clutching the strange key. "Because once Victor realizes where we're going, he'll be waiting for us." The abandoned Calloway building stood like a monument to forgotten dreams in San Francisco's industrial district. Its Art Deco facade cracked and weathered by decades of neglect. Fog rolled in from the bay, shrouding the structure in an ethereal mist that made it seem more like a ghost than a building. Nate stared up at what had once been his father's headquarters, trying to reconcile the decay before him with the empire he'd unconsciously rebuilt. Broken windows stared down like empty eyes, and graffiti covered the lower floors where vandals had found easy targets. "Hard to believe this was once the heart of a shipping empire," Claire said softly, supporting their mother as they approached the building's rear entrance. Evelyn's breathing had grown more labored during the flight from Boston, but her eyes remained sharp. "Your father always said the most important things should be hidden in plain sight. Everyone assumes this place is worthless now." Marcus finished his security sweep of the perimeter. "We're clear for the moment, but Victor's people can't be far behind." I intercepted chatter about private jets landing at SFO. "How much time do we have?" Nate asked, using a crowbar to pry open the rusted service door. "Maybe an hour if we're lucky." The building's interior was a maze of shadows and decay. Water damage had warped the floors, and decades of abandonment had left everything covered in dust and debris. But as they made their way toward the basement levels, following Evelyn's directions, the construction quality became apparent. The walls were solid concrete, reinforced with steel that had barely shown any rust despite the building's abandonment. Emilio built this to survive earthquakes, fires, even bombing, Evelyn explained, as they descended a staircase that seemed to go deeper than any normal basement should. He was paranoid about protecting what mattered most. 3 levels down, they reached a corridor that looked different from the rest of the building. The walls here were polished metal, unmarked by time or weather. Recessed lighting hummed to life as they approached, activated by motion sensors that had been waiting decades for visitors. "Okay, that's definitely not standard construction," Claire observed. At the end of the corridor, they found what they'd come for, a vault door that belonged in a bank, not an abandoned building. The metal surface was seamless except for 2 hand-shaped indentations and a small slot that perfectly matched the key Evelyn carried. "Both of you need to place your hands on the scanners simultaneously," Evelyn instructed, inserting the key and turning it with a click that echoed through the corridor. "Your father programmed it to require genetic verification from both his children." Nate and Claire exchanged glances, then pressed their palms against the cool metal surfaces. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the scanners pulsed with blue light, reading their DNA signatures, comparing them to samples stored decades earlier. "Welcome, Calloway heirs," a recorded voice announced. Their father's voice, preserved in digital amber. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and you've found each other. I'm proud of you both, wherever you are." Claire's eyes filled with tears. This was the first time she'd ever heard her father's voice. The massive vault door swung open with surprising silence, revealing a room that took their breath away. The space was enormous, filled with filing cabinets, computer servers, and walls covered with photographs, documents, and maps. But the centerpiece was a conference table surrounded by chairs, as if Emilio had been expecting this reunion all along. "My God," Nate breathed, stepping into the vault. "It's like a command center. For a war he knew was coming," Evelyn confirmed, following them inside. "Victor always underestimated your father's strategic thinking." Marcus whistled low as he examined the computer equipment. "This stuff is decades ahead of its time. How did he—" Emilio was brilliant with technology. He saw the potential of digital evidence storage before anyone else. Evelyn moved to one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder. He spent 5 years documenting every illegal thing Victor had done, building a case that could destroy him completely. Claire found herself drawn to a wall covered with photographs. They showed Victor at various ages, but in each image his expression was cold, calculating. "These look like surveillance photos." "Because they are. Your father suspected Victor was planning something for months before the murder. He hired private investigators to document everything." Evelyn pulled out another folder, this one containing audio equipment, including recorded conversations that prove Victor's guilt beyond any doubt. She activated an old tape player, and Victor's voice filled the vault. Younger, but unmistakably him. "Emilio's becoming a problem. He's asking too many questions about the Hong Kong operation if he finds out what we're really shipping." Another voice, rougher. "You want him gone permanently. I want him gone in a way that looks accidental. And I want access to his files, his contacts, everything." Evelyn will need comfort in her grief. Comfort only her loving brother can provide. The recording continued, detailing plans for Emilio's murder with chilling precision. Claire felt sick, listening to her uncle discuss her father's death like a business transaction. "There's more," Evelyn said grimly, moving to another section of the vault. "Victor didn't just kill your father for business reasons, or even because of his obsession with me. He was trafficking children." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Nate sank into one of the chairs around the conference table. "Project Phoenix was designed to help refugees and immigrants find safe passage to new lives," Evelyn continued. "But Victor was using some of the same routes to smuggle children for wealthy clients who had terrible intentions." Marcus found a computer terminal that was still functional and began scrolling through files. "Jesus Christ, there are shipping manifests here listing children as cargo, dozens of them." "Emilio found out 3 days before Victor killed him," Evelyn said. "He was planning to expose everything. Not just Victor's business crimes, but the human trafficking ring. That's when Victor knew he had to act fast." Claire studied a map on the wall showing shipping routes across the Pacific. Red pins marked locations where children had been taken. Blue pins showed where they'd been delivered. The scope of the operation was staggering. "How many kids?" she asked. "Over 200 in the 5 years before your father's death," Marcus read from the computer screen. "And Victor's been expanding the operation ever since. The current estimates are—" He trailed off, his face pale. "How many?" Nate demanded. "Thousands. Over the past 35 years. Victor Langford has been responsible for trafficking thousands of children." The vault fell silent, except for the hum of electronics. The magnitude of Victor's crimes was almost incomprehensible. This wasn't just about murder or business fraud. It was about systematic evil on an industrial scale. "Now you understand why your father was willing to die to stop him," Evelyn said quietly. "And why Victor's been so desperate to find this vault. The evidence here could bring down not just him, but an entire network of monsters." Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the building. Marcus grabbed his radio, listening to chatter from his security team stationed outside. "They're here," he announced grimly. "Multiple vehicles, armed personnel. Victor's brought an army." Through the vault's ventilation system, they could hear the distant sound of boots on stairs, voices shouting orders, doors being kicked in. "How long until they reach us?" Evelyn asked calmly. 10 minutes, maybe less." Nate looked around the vault at 35 years of carefully gathered evidence. "Can we get all this out?" "Not enough time," Marcus replied. "But the computers have wireless capability. I can start uploading everything to secure servers." "Do it," Nate ordered. Then he turned to his mother. "What else do we need to know? What haven't you told us?" Evelyn's smile was sad but proud. "There's one more thing your father left for you. The location of Victor's current operations, where he's holding the children now. She pulled out a final folder, this one containing recent photographs and shipping schedules. "Victor thinks he's been hunting you," she said as the sounds of approaching footsteps grew louder. "But your father's been hunting him for 35 years. Every piece of evidence in this vault leads to one conclusion. Victor Langford is about to be exposed, and he knows it." The vault door shuddered as something heavy struck it from outside. "Time's up," Marcus announced. "But the upload is complete. Everything's been copied to secure servers." "Then let's finish this," Nate said, pocketing the folder with Victor's current location. "It's time our uncle learned what happens when you murder a Calloway." The vault door exploded inward with a deafening crash, sending metal fragments ricocheting off the walls, through the smoke and debris. Victor Langford stepped into the room like a predator finally cornering its prey. At 70, he moved with the confidence of a man who'd spent decades eliminating obstacles, flanked by 6 armed mercenaries whose faces showed no emotion behind tactical masks. But it wasn't the guns that made Nate's blood run cold. It was seeing Victor's face for the first time in 35 years. The resemblance to their mother was unmistakable, the same bone structure and piercing eyes. But where Evelyn's features held warmth and compassion, Victor's were carved from ice. "My dear sister," Victor said, his cultured voice echoing through the vault. "Still playing the martyr, I see. And these must be the children who've caused me so much trouble." Evelyn struggled to her feet, Marcus supporting her weak frame. Despite her condition, her voice was steady. "Hello, Victor. You're looking well for a man who should have been in prison decades ago." Victor's laugh was genuinely amused. "Prison, oh, Evelyn. You always were naive. Prison is for poor people who get caught. Rich people who get caught become philanthropists." He gestured to the walls of evidence surrounding them. "Though I admit, dear Emilio was more thorough than I expected." Claire stepped protectively in front of her mother. "You murdered our father because he found out about the children you were trafficking. I eliminated a business partner who was threatening our mutual prosperity," Victor corrected with chilling casualness. "The fact that he was sleeping with my sister was simply an added motivation." "She was never yours," Nate growled, his hands clenched into fists. Victor's expression darkened. "Everything was mine first. The business, the family connections, even Evelyn's affections, until your father poisoned her against me with his bleeding heart idealism." His eyes swept the vault's contents. Emilio always thought he was building something noble. Project Phoenix. What a pretentious name for refugee smuggling. He was saving lives. Claire shot back. "You perverted it into something evil. I made it profitable. Do you have any idea how much wealthy clients will pay for? Specific services. Your father's infrastructure was perfect. I just expanded the customer base." Victor's smile was predatory. Though I'll admit, his security measures were impressively paranoid. Marcus had been slowly positioning himself while Victor talked. But the mercenaries were professionals. Their weapons tracked his every movement. "Don't even think about it," Victor warned. "My men have killed for far less money than I'm paying them today." From her position behind Claire, Evelyn spoke quietly. "Show them the recordings, Victor. Tell them how you planned their father's murder." "You played those ancient tapes. How wonderfully nostalgic." Victor pulled out a sleek tablet and tapped the screen. "But I prefer more recent evidence." The tablet's display showed a live video feed from what appeared to be a warehouse. Children, dozens of them, ranging in age from perhaps 6 to 16, sat in rows of metal cages. The image quality was crystal clear, and the timestamp showed it was happening right now. Claire's scream of horror echoed through the vault. "My current operation," Victor said proudly. "Bigger and more efficient than anything Emilio could have imagined. These particular children are bound for clients in Southeast Asia who pay premium prices for American products." "You're a monster," Nate whispered, staring at the screen in revulsion. "I'm a businessman who understands supply and demand, but I'm also a grandfather who doesn't enjoy unnecessary violence." Victor's tone became almost paternal. "Which brings us to our negotiation. You have 1 hour to transfer all of Emilio's remaining assets to accounts I control. In return, I'll make your deaths quick and painless." "And if we refuse?" Marcus asked. Victor tapped the tablet again. The warehouse feed switched to show armed guards moving toward the cages. "The children die first, Then you. Then I'll track down everyone you've ever cared about and eliminate them systematically." His smile never wavered. "I've had 35 years to perfect this process." Evelyn suddenly doubled over, coughing violently. Blood spattered the floor at her feet, and when she looked up, her face was gray with pain. "Mom!" Claire rushed to support her. "I'm fine," Evelyn gasped, but clearly she wasn't. The stress of the confrontation was accelerating her body's decline. Victor watched his sister's suffering with what might have been satisfaction. "Cancer, isn't it? You always were too sentimental to take proper care of yourself. Though I suppose 35 years of living like a fugitive didn't help." "You drove her to this," Nate snarled, taking a step toward Victor. The mercenaries immediately raised their weapons, but Victor held up a hand. "Actually, I drove her to something much more interesting." He pulled out an old photograph and held it up for them to see. It showed a much younger Victor and Evelyn together, but the body language was all wrong. Victor's arm was around Evelyn's waist in a possessive grip, and her smile looked forced, frightened. "Did she ever tell you about our special relationship growing up?" Victor's voice took on a sick intimacy. "How I taught her about love before any other man could corrupt her understanding." The implications hit like physical blows. Claire felt vomit rising in her throat. "You're lying," she whispered. "Ask her," Victor suggested. "Ask dear Evelyn why she was so desperate to escape our family home. Ask her why she threw herself at the first decent man who showed her kindness." Evelyn's silence was answer enough. The shame and pain in her eyes told a story that explained decades of self-imposed exile. "She was a child," Nate said, his voice deadly quiet. "She was mine," Victor replied simply. Everything else was just borrowed time. Something snapped inside Nate. 35 years of carefully controlled rage, of building walls against emotional vulnerability, of transforming pain into power. All of it crystallized into pure fury. He launched himself at Victor with the kind of savage intensity he'd learned in those Texas orphanages. The vault erupted into chaos. Marcus used Nate's attack as cover to disable 2 of the mercenaries while Claire grabbed one of their fallen weapons. But Victor was faster than his age suggested, producing a pistol and pressing it against Evelyn's temple. "Enough," he roared. "Another step, and I paint these walls with her brains." Everyone froze. Victor's breathing was heavy. His perfect composure finally cracked. "You want to know the truth?" he snarled at his captive audience. "I loved her. I loved Evelyn more than life itself, and she chose a nobody dock worker over her own family. So I took everything from her. Her husband, her children, her life, and I've spent 35 years making sure she knew it was her fault." "Victor," Evelyn said softly, her voice barely audible, "I forgave you a long time ago." The words hit him like a slap. For just a moment, the mask slipped completely, revealing something broken and desperate underneath. "You? What?" "I forgave you," she repeated, meeting his eyes. "The abuse, the murder, the years of running. I forgave it all, because holding on to that hate was killing me faster than any cancer ever could." Victor stared at her, the gun trembling in his hand. "You can't forgive me. I won't let you forgive me. I need you to hate me as much as I hate myself." And in that moment of vulnerability, Claire understood what their mother had been trying to teach them all along. The silence in the vault stretched like a taut wire, broken only by the sound of Evelyn's labored breathing and the distant hum of electronics. Victor stood frozen, his gun still pressed against his sister's temple, but his hand was shaking now. The mask of cold control he'd worn for 70 years was cracking, revealing something raw and broken underneath. "You can't forgive me," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I killed your husband. I stole your children. I turned your life into a nightmare." Evelyn's eyes remained steady, filled with a peace that seemed impossible given their circumstances. "I know what you did, Victor. I've spent 35 years documenting every crime, every murder, every child you've destroyed. But hatred is a poison that destroys the vessel that contains it." "This is insane," one of the mercenaries muttered, but his weapon had lowered slightly. Even trained killers were affected by the strange power of the moment. Claire watched her uncle's face transform, decades of carefully constructed justifications crumbling under the weight of unexpected grace. "Mom, what are you doing?" "What your father taught me to do," Evelyn replied softly. Emilio always said that the only way to truly defeat evil was to refuse to become it. Victor's laugh came out choked. Desperate. You think forgiveness is going to save those children? You think your noble sentiment changes anything? No, Evelyn said, and suddenly her voice carried steel despite her weakness. But love will. She reached into her coat pocket with her free hand. Moving slowly so as not to provoke Victor's mercenaries, what she pulled out made everyone in the room freeze. A small device with a single red button. What is that? Victor demanded, pressing the gun harder against her temple. Your father was many things, Evelyn said, looking at Nate and Claire. But above all, he was a planner. This vault wasn't just meant to preserve evidence. It was designed to be a weapon. Marcus's eyes widened as understanding dawned. The wireless uplinks. You've been transmitting everything. For the past hour, every file in this vault has been streaming to news organizations, law enforcement agencies, and human rights groups around the world, Evelyn confirmed. But this button does something more immediate. She held up the device, and Victor could see his own reflection in its polished surface. Emilio had emergency protocols built into every shipping route he ever established. This activates all of them simultaneously. What kind of protocols? Claire asked. Rescue protocols. In 30 seconds, federal agents will be hitting every location associated with Victor's trafficking network, including the warehouse you just showed us. Victor's face went white. You're bluffing. Am I? Evelyn's thumb hovered over the button. Your tablet is still connected to that warehouse feed. Watch what happens. The tablet in Victor's hand buzzed with an incoming alert. Against his better judgment, he glanced at the screen. The warehouse camera showed federal agents streaming through every entrance, their tactical gear blazing with FBI and ICE markings. The children who'd been in cages moments before were already being led to safety. Impossible, Victor breathed. Those locations are classified. No one knows. Emilio knew, Evelyn interrupted. He spent 5 years mapping your entire operation. Every warehouse, every shipping route, every safe house. He gave me the activation codes before he died, along with instructions to use them only when I was certain we could save everyone. The mercenaries were looking at each other now, professional confidence wavering. They'd signed up to intimidate a family, not to fight the federal government. Sir, one of them said quietly, we should extract now. But Victor wasn't listening. His entire world was collapsing in real time, and the woman he'd tortured for decades was the architect of his destruction. Why? He asked, his voice breaking. Why save me for last? You could have activated this years ago. Because I needed you to see it, Evelyn replied. I needed you to watch everything you built crumble, and I needed you to know that it was love that defeated you, not hatred. Claire stepped forward, her voice gentle despite everything Victor had done. Uncle Victor, it doesn't have to end in more violence. You can surrender. You can help us save any children we might have missed. Help you. Victor's laugh was bitter. After what I've done, you think there's redemption for someone like me? I think, Nate said slowly, that our mother just proved forgiveness is possible for anyone. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept it. For a moment, something flickered in Victor's eyes. A glimpse of the broken child who'd learned to confuse love with possession, who'd spent 70 years trying to fill an emptiness that could never be satisfied through violence. But then his tablet buzzed again. This time, the alert showed federal agents surrounding the abandoned Calloway building. Spotlights blazed through the fog, and tactical teams were already breaching the upper floors. They're here for you, Marcus observed. It's over. Victor looked around the vault, at the evidence that would destroy him, at the family he'd terrorized, at the sister who'd somehow found the strength to forgive the unforgivable. For the first time in decades, he seemed to see clearly. The other locations, he said quietly. There are 3 more warehouses I never told anyone about. Children who won't be found unless... He pulled out his phone and began typing coordinates into a message. His hands were steady now, the shaking gone. Victor, Evelyn said softly. What are you doing? Something I should have done 35 years ago. He sent the message, then set his phone on the conference table. Those coordinates will reach the FBI within minutes. Every child will be found. The sound of boots in the corridor outside was getting closer. Victor's mercenaries had already begun laying down their weapons, smart enough to recognize when a situation was beyond salvage. "And now?" Claire asked. Victor looked at his sister one last time. "Now I face what I've done. All of it." He slowly lowered his gun and placed it on the table next to his phone. "Evelyn, I know," she said simply. "I know you're sorry. I know you've been sorry for decades. That's why I could forgive you." Federal agents burst into the vault, weapons drawn, tactical lights cutting through the gloom. Everyone on the ground now. As they were surrounded by law enforcement, Victor kept his eyes on Evelyn. "Will you visit me?" "In prison." Evelyn's smile was sad but genuine. "I don't have long left, Victor. But, yes, for whatever time I have, I'll visit." "Sir, you need to see this," one of the FBI agents called out, examining the computer terminals. "This is evidence of the largest human trafficking operation we've ever encountered, and it looks like someone just handed us the entire network." Agent Sarah Mitchell, who seemed to be in charge, approached the family. "Which one of you activated the rescue protocols?" Evelyn raised her hand weakly. "That would be me, Agent Mitchell. I've been waiting 35 years to push that button." "Well, ma'am, preliminary reports suggest you just saved over 400 children. We'll need statements from all of you, but first..." She looked at Victor, who was now in handcuffs but strangely peaceful. "Victor Langford, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, human trafficking, and about 20 other federal crimes." As Victor was led away, he paused at the vault entrance. "Evelyn, the children I showed you on the tablet, they're safe now." "They're safe," Agent Mitchell confirmed. Victor nodded once, then disappeared into the corridor, finally paying the price for a lifetime of choices that had destroyed so many lives. In the sudden quiet that followed, Claire helped her mother sit down in one of the conference room chairs. "Mom, you did it. It's over." "No, sweetheart," Evelyn said, her voice growing fainter. "Now it begins. You and Nate have work to do." 6 months later, the Evelyn Grace Memorial Hospital rose from the hills overlooking San Francisco Bay like a beacon of hope. Its modern glass and steel architecture reflecting both the sunrise and the promise of new beginnings. Claire stood in the children's wing, watching as 8-year-old Maria Rodriguez took her first steps since being rescued from Victor's trafficking network. The little girl's face blazed with determination as she moved between parallel bars, her physical therapist cheering each small victory. "She's remarkable," Dr. Sarah Kim observed, joining Claire at the observation window. 3 months ago, she could barely speak. The trauma was so severe we weren't sure she'd ever recover. "Kids are resilient," Claire replied, but her voice carried the weight of knowledge earned through months of working with trafficking survivors. "They heal faster than adults when they feel safe," through the hospital's windows. Claire could see the Pacific Ocean stretching toward horizons that had once carried ships full of hope and dreams. Her father's ships, before Victor perverted that legacy into something unspeakable. Now those same shipping routes carried medical supplies, educational materials, and legitimate cargo that built communities instead of destroying them. "Ms. Whitmore," a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Maria had finished her therapy session and was approaching with the careful politeness of a child who'd learned too young that adults could be dangerous. "Hey there, brave girl," Claire said, kneeling to Maria's eye level. "How did the walking go today?" "Better, doctor. Kim says maybe next week I can try the stairs." Maria's English was improving daily, but she still spoke with the careful precision of someone translating thoughts from another language. "Are you really the lady who saved us?" Claire's throat tightened. The children in the hospital, 127 survivors from Victor's network, had somehow transformed her from Claire the florist into Claire the hero, a role she'd never wanted but couldn't abandon. "I had help from my family," she said gently. "We all saved each other. Where's your brother today? He's visiting someone important, but he'll be back soon." Meanwhile, across the city, San Quentin State Prison was a fortress of concrete and razor wire, its imposing walls designed to contain society's most dangerous criminals. Nate sat across from Victor in the visiting room, separated by reinforced glass that couldn't quite muffle the sounds of despair that permeated the facility. Victor looked older than his 70 years, the prison jumpsuit hanging loose on a frame that had lost weight and presence. But his eyes were clearer than Nate had ever seen them, freed from the madness that had driven 5 decades of violence. "How is she today?" Victor asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. He rarely spoke to anyone except Nate during these weekly visits. Weaker, Nate admitted. The doctors say maybe another week, possibly 2. Victor's hands clenched into fists on the metal table. I should be there. She shouldn't die surrounded by strangers. She's not surrounded by strangers, Nate replied firmly. Claire's with her constantly. Marcus stops by every day. Half the hospital staff considers her family at this point. But not me, not her brother. Victor's voice broke slightly. I took 35 years from her. I can't give them back. No, you can't. But you can give her something else. Nate pulled out a photograph, the latest image from the hospital's children's wing, showing Maria and 6 other young survivors learning to paint in art therapy. You can see what your confession made possible. Victor studied the photo with an intensity that bordered on hunger. Since his arrest, he'd provided testimony that had led to the dismantling of trafficking networks across 3 continents. Hundreds of children had been rescued, and dozens of predators now shared his fate behind bars. Do you think it matters? Victor asked quietly. Does saving them balance the scales for the ones I don't know, Nate answered honestly. I'm not sure that's how it works, but I know those kids are alive because you chose to do the right thing, finally. Victor nodded slowly, then looked up with something that might have been hope. The new project Claire mentioned last week, the Educational Foundation. Funding is approved. We're partnering with organizations in 12 countries to identify at-risk children and provide them with alternatives to trafficking. Nate's voice carried pride despite himself. It's what Dad would have wanted. Project Phoenix, but bigger. Using my money, Victor said with dark irony. Blood money building something good. Money doesn't have morality, Nate replied. People do, and you're choosing to use yours for redemption instead of destruction. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. 2 men who'd spent most of their lives as strangers discovering they were family in the most complicated way possible. Nathaniel, Victor said suddenly. When she's gone, will you still visit? Nate considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, he would have answered with a definitive no. But watching his uncle transform from monster to broken man, seeking atonement, had changed his understanding of justice and mercy. Yeah, he said finally. I'll visit. Someone needs to make sure you keep doing the right thing. Back at the hospital, the private room on the top floor had been Evelyn's home for the past month, as her condition deteriorated beyond what could be managed at home. But it didn't feel like a typical hospital room. Claire had filled it with carnations, family photos, and all the evidence of a life lived with purpose, despite impossible circumstances. Evelyn lay propped against pillows, her breathing shallow but peaceful. The morphine drip kept her comfortable, but her mind remained sharp during her waking hours. Tell me about the foundation again, she requested as Claire arranged fresh flowers in a vase by the window. The Nathaniel Calloway Foundation for Child Protection, Claire said, settling into the chair beside the bed. Nate's donated $2 billion to start, with ongoing funding from Victor's seized assets. We're working with governments and NGOs worldwide to identify vulnerable children before they disappear into trafficking networks. And the shipping routes, being converted back to Dad's original vision. Legitimate cargo, fair wages for workers, investment in port communities instead of exploitation. Claire took her mother's hand, noting how fragile it felt. We found his original business plans in the vault. It's like having a roadmap to build the world he dreamed of. Evelyn smiled. He always said the best revenge was living well. I think he'd approve of what you're doing. We're doing, Claire corrected gently. This is your legacy too, Mom. Those 35 years in hiding, documenting Victor's crimes. Without that evidence, none of this would have been possible. I just gathered information. You and Nate are the ones with the courage to use it for something beautiful. The door opened quietly, and Nate entered with Marcus, both men carrying coffee, and the weight of recent conversations with federal prosecutors. How did it go? Claire asked. Victor's testimony led to 12 more arrests in Southeast Asia, Marcus reported, and the judge accepted his recommendation for life without parole instead of the death penalty. He'll spend his remaining years helping investigators map trafficking networks. Evelyn nodded approval. Good. He needs time to make amends, not just time to die. Nate approached the bed, his expression soft with a vulnerability he'd learned to show only in this room. Mom, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said months ago. What is it? Sweetheart, thank you. The words came out rough with emotion. For 35 years, I thought you'd abandoned me. I built my entire life around the idea that love was temporary, that everyone eventually left. But you never left. You were protecting us the whole time. Oh, Nate. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I left because I loved you, not because I didn't. I know that now. And I know that everything good I've ever accomplished was because you and Dad gave me the foundation to build on. He paused, struggling with words he'd never learned to say easily. I love you, Mom. I should have told you that every day since we found each other. You did tell me, Evelyn whispered. Every time you chose love over hate. Every time you protected your sister. Every time you used your power to help instead of hurt. You were telling me you loved me. As the sun set over San Francisco Bay, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and amber, the family that had been scattered by violence and reunited by forgiveness sat together in peaceful silence. Outside, the city hummed with life and possibility, unaware that in one small room, the power of love was quietly changing the world. Evelyn Grace Calloway passed away peacefully 3 days later, surrounded by the children she'd saved and the legacy of hope they would carry forward. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of trafficking survivors, FBI agents, and people whose lives had been touched by her 35-year fight for justice. But perhaps most remarkably, it was also attended by Victor Langford, under heavy guard, but granted compassionate leave to say goodbye to the sister who taught him that even the deepest darkness could be transformed by love. The war against evil would continue, but it would be fought with weapons Emilio and Evelyn Calloway had always believed in: justice, mercy, and the unshakable conviction that broken things could be made whole again.